Shamika, it's good to be connected with you in this way. I'm glad we're finally getting in touch again.
Yes, Nathan, ever since I met you, it has been an awesome experience each time we've talked. Like, legit. So I'm really excited.
Well, let's see what we can do here. Let's see what we can do here. I want to start out by hearing from you a bit about the story of how you became a tech chaplain and what that means.
Yes.
What does that mean? Are there any others?
Oh, well, I certainly hope so by now. So a tech chaplain, as I have come to describe it, is a person who serves others in the digital space using a ministry of presence where you meet people where they are and without judgment, but with helping them find full dignity in their crisis and in their challenge. You walk with them through that crisis and through that challenge. And of course, with a chaplain in a hospital or a prison, those are really specific situations and those are really clear challenges. But a tech chaplain takes those same kinds of struggles and challenges that one might find in a hospital bed or a prison cell and sees those challenges happening with someone's cell phone not working, or they're inundated with emails and they're not able to fully function as the professional person that they are, or someone is struggling to try and figure out how to incorporate different kinds of technologies into the work that they do or the life that they have, or someone's trying to figure out how to do this whole tech thing that we do that's so ubiquitous in our lives, how to do it well, how to do it ethically, thinking about the people on the margins and how they are affected or left out of the conversations and experiences that happen online in the digital space through social media and that ilk and the like. And so that's what encompasses a lot of the tech chaplaincy work that I do. And it started at Union Theological Seminary when I came in as a Master of Divinity student back in the fall of 2013. Of course, at the time I had no idea that this is what I would end up doing here, but I came in knowing that I wanted to serve God and God's people and came to seminary to figure out what that meant. And my first week or so here, I decided to organize all of my school stuff using the technology that we had available here at school, which happens, we're a Google school, so I'm learning how to use and relearning how to use all of the different apps that are involved in that. And when students started to see the organized stuff that I had, or how I was able to pull things in very quickly in terms of resources and readings and this kind of thing, people kept asking me to share. And by the end of the semester, I started feeling really bad that I was just sharing with people and not showing them how to do it. It was sort of the teach a person to fish kind of thing. So in the second semester, I went to the IT department and asked if there was anyone in that department who could help put on some trainings or do some workshops or maybe have some open office hours. Because really the IT department was there to help when stuff broke. They were there to go fix it, but there wasn't a lot of proactive or preemptive work to help integrate students into the different resources that they had, ranging from the accounts that we had with Google, but also the technologies and resources from the library, or just general outside of that, all the different ways that technology can be supported to students in their work. And when I asked the IT department that question, they were like, well, we don't really do that, but what about you? What are your hours? Like, can you come in on the weekend and after 5 o'clock? Because we're not doing that. And that was where tech chaplaincy was born. I was originally a computer chaplain because I was helping people specifically on computers, but it very quickly encompassed more and more things as people felt more comfortable and trusting with me to talk about, well, what if I want to use a tablet or there's issues with my cell phone? I just got a new cell phone. Some people, because they're students and sometimes they haven't been students in a really long time, they're having to incorporate new technology into their life to catch up. And that was really tricky for folks. So having someone who they could trust, who helped them feel comfortable and safe and not feel stupid for asking questions, that was really a heartwarming moment for a lot of people. So I went from having some open hours over the January intercession last year to having weekly hours, to doing one-on-one trainings, to doing group trainings and workshops. And I've worked now with faculty, students, and staff. And I've also been a part of different projects on campus as a tech chaplain. So I'm there in the room in case anything happens, or I've been asked to be a part of a project to help add perspective on, well, here are the different ways you can incorporate technology with this project beyond just you need a website, or maybe this is something that needs an app, or this is how you incorporate social media into what you're doing. So as I've been doing this work, I see it as a ministry, but it's very much set up as a social entrepreneurial endeavor.
Yeah. Oh, it's so powerful. You know, it's the role of accompaniment in learning technology, I think is really underappreciated. And, you know, people, I think, often feel like they either have to do it alone or take a class.
Yes.
And, you know, get a certification, something like that.
Yes.
And one thing that what you're saying reminds me of is, you know, how when I first started getting into this, you know, when I was not first, but one of the stages for me of my kind of computing biography was a failed year in computer science in college.
Oh, wow.
And in that time, I spent I put a lot of energy into like reading the old manuals, you know, the kind of classic manuals for hackers, and you know what was the literature, and how did people teach themselves, you know, back when these technologies were super new.
Yes.
And so often what they would describe as the ideal learning environment is sitting there working with the machine with a friend next to you, somebody who knows what they're doing a bit more than you in whatever like programming language you're doing or whatever.
Sure.
And the idea is like mostly try to figure stuff out by yourself, because that's a really important way to learn, and to learn in an empowered way. But have that presence of somebody who knows more, somebody that you can turn to, who can kind of guide you through the questions and the problems. And you know, it made me realize that you know, maybe I never would have even tried programming if I hadn't had a next door neighbor growing up who was really into that stuff, and kind of showed me a few things, and just gave me that sense of possibility that you know, I too could do some of this. You know, even though he's kind of a superstar programmer right now, and I'm definitely not, you know, I've stuck with like strengths. English words, you know, but there's a sense in which, it doesn't feel scary because I've had that, because of that presence.
Yes.
Because of that presence.
Yes. That's huge. That makes such a big difference. And when I was a kid, we had a computer in my house, starting in the 5th grade is when we got a desktop computer. Before then, we had a typewriter. And I was the person who, when we got our desktop computer, I touched every button. I went through every menu. But I did all this by myself because I was just playing on the computer. And when I messed something up, I quickly figured out how to fix it before my mom came home, or even figured out that something had been messed up, because I'm sure she wouldn't have even noticed. But I was also exposed to a free summer program called the Pre-Freshman Engineering Program. That was from the 7th grade, 8th grade, and 9th grade. It's like a 3-summer program, which was huge because I was the oldest of 4 kids in a really poor community in the middle of San Antonio, Texas. And I didn't have a lot of opportunities to get really enriching experiences because I was poor. I couldn't afford them. So I was looking for free things to do one summer, and I stumbled across this program. And I was exposed to computer science. I got to code a soda machine that would give exact change. Wow. And I was so excited about that. But I also was exposed to physics and engineering and these kinds of things. So it was given to me as an option. Whereas before, I was really good at math and I liked science, but it was just something that I liked to do for school. I didn't see anything past the grades at that point. But programs like that, and then I went into a math camp afterwards, and that even further opened my eyes to opportunities like going to a college, an Ivy League college, or going to a college outside of a really small private Baptist institution that I wanted to go to. Like the director of this math camp was like, you need to be applying to better places. And it had never occurred to me because I was poor that I should apply anywhere fancy or big or with a whole bunch of resources, because I didn't think of it that way. So thanks to that one conversation that I had with the math camp director, I did apply to Harvard and Stanford and all these other places. And by the grace of God, my belief is I was able to get into those places because of the favor that I have, the people that God put in my path, and the work that I was able to do on my own, all of those things combined. So all of those passions came together at that institution. Sadly, I did not become the mathematician that I wanted to be, or the computer science person. I took a computer science class, and when I tried to program Frogger, you would die if you turned left. Like, it was a problem. Couldn't figure it out. But the passion was still there. So that's what's really great about now. Even though I wasn't able to be a computer programmer or an engineer, all of those passions are still things that drive what I do, and I'm still connected to the industry or that profession, but in a tangential way, in a way that helps bridge the gap between people who are centered and steeped in that space and people who are not, but who need aspects of it or who need part of what's going on in that space.
Yeah, well, in some ways, I would challenge that sense that this is on the outside of the industry. Maybe we need to recenter our ideas about what the world of technology is and where its center is. Maybe its center is on the front lines of adoption and use, and the ways that people are using these tools coming from very different communities than those which produced some of the tools. And that's why I think what you're doing is so exciting. And I wonder too, like, where does the chaplain part come in? Why don't you just work at the Genius Bar? Why go through all that divinity school?
Great question. I specifically tell people I am not Geek Squad. I will not put your computer together after it is broken, but I focus on the person and not the machine. So my work is really about addressing the fear and the anxiety and the anger that people have around technology and the calming presence that I have. I teach and train people on how to use that themselves. Like, it's really important to me for people to recognize that because these machines are now an extension of who you are, if you believe that your body is a temple, if you believe that if you've been asked to be a good steward of the world around you, including yourself, and that means that this device as well, and figuring out how to open people's eyes to the divine within their technology and their devices, because I believe God is everywhere, including in all the things that we created. So that helps people have a different connection with and relationship to the devices that they use. And very often, people have a fear around breaking it, like, if they touch anything, it's going to explode kind of thing. And this comes from not being able to handle things before someone says, don't touch that, don't break that, do you know how much that costs, da-da-da-da. On the other side, there is this idea, and I like what you said about taking the center away from the quote-unquote experts and professionals, because people feel like, oh, I'm not a techie, I'm not tech savvy, it's not my thing. Politicians said the same thing when we were talking about net neutrality, like, well, I'm not a nerd, I don't know how the internet works. Unacceptable, okay? Same thing with politicians that have no idea how the female body works, but you're on a committee to figure out what? Okay, that's the problem. Like, the onus is now on individuals to have a working knowledge of how the technology works or how wherever they are in the digital space, how that's set up. And because the onus is on individuals, people have this steep learning curve that they feel like they have to hike alone. The few times they do reach out for help, people shut them down. There's this actually da-da-da-da-da-da, or you didn't know, that, like, feigning disbelief that people don't know stuff. Like, there's this whole culture that keeps people out, or it's a front that people have to overcome to get in. And I think the article that you wrote recently about the joy of slow computing really helps bring that to the forefront of a new movement that's happening, where people would behoove themselves to want to be a part of more tech-oriented communities or engaging with technology in new ways. But because new people are entering in, there are some blocks and some obstacles that are now being confronted. And people are like, wait a minute, actually, these are not okay.
Yeah, totally. Well, it makes me think of this feminist hackerspace in San Francisco I once visited called Double Union. And they had all sorts of knickknacks around, that reflect the culture. For instance, like an annotated version of Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In, with a little red pen attached to it with a string. So anybody who wanted to could come up and add their comments to the margins, or cross out what they didn't like.
That is fantastic.
But one thing that they had too was, I think it was a sticker or a button that said meritocracy is a lie, right? And I think that's a very important statement to make in the San Francisco tech community, where often this idea that it's just the smartest people rising to the top, that's it. is what we hear over and over again. And that covers over the sense in which there already are communities and like old boy networks and, and very, very gendered, very racialized, very class informed, communities that are driving, this industry right now, for better or worse. And, it's important to recognize that if other people are going to step into this industry and into this world, into this kind of technological future, it's important that they do so as communities as well. And that idea of the kind of the vision of the individual meritocratic, kind of hacker type, is a lie. And it serves to disempower people who, who think that that's what they have to do. And if they can't figure something out in 5 minutes by themselves, then they're stupid. Nobody figures it out in 5 minutes by themselves. Yeah. And that article I did, is a kind of new attempt to take on the question of open source computing, which is something I'm very interested in. But it's something that, for one thing, has created a very, very white and male culture around it. And it's something that really depends or kind of presents this idea of the individual working in isolation, contributing to something central rather than telling the story of free and open software as a story of communities, of really amazing often forms of social organization, like the Debian Constitution. Many, behind every piece of open source software is a social structure that are governed in many different kinds of ways, and create very powerful communities that enable these individual technologists to contribute and to build something together.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think there's a really interesting connection between what's happening with like an open source community or in general the tech community around being homogenized like this and the historical imagination around Manifest Destiny, where you had the lone cowboy, you had the lone explorer or the lone person, usually man, who explores, conquers, and then pulls himself up by the bootstrap. And then like over time, this notion of you are responsible for your own destiny and it's out there, you just have to reach out and grab it, means that the onus is on the individual to find wealth and build the American dream, so to speak. And so as people who are actually struggling and do need community and do need infrastructure and help around a whole bunch of different, in a whole bunch of different ways, that's seen as those people are less than, those people are taking away from this structure, and so the politics around things like SNAP benefits and way that people are treated. My God, like in Wisconsin, they have this list of like foods that you can't get for SNAP benefits now. It's ridiculous. So the same kind of attitudes exist now, where if you can't teach yourself how to code a language, or if you don't have certain level of understanding, like if you're not picking up what people are putting down really quickly, you just get bulldozed over, and people like will push you out through that language and that expectation of what you need to have. So I talked about the black tax in my response to your article. I was thinking about, like, as a black woman who wants to go into some of these tech spaces, I have been told before, as I try to ask a question somewhere, well, first you really need to know something about technology, or first you really need to know something, because they assume that I know nothing. Like, they have no idea what my background is, but the assumption is she's a woman and she's black, so these are things associated with her. So I have to prove myself even more so just to get half the kind of cred that I would if I was a white guy. Where the assumption is, oh yeah, he probably knows how to code, like maybe even just a little bit. But there's no assumption that I know HTML or Java or whatever the things that I may know or may not know. So I have to overcome those things even more so. And there's class issues, there's gender issues, there's race issues. So as more and more people are starting to become part of this conversation, they're coming up against this homogenized community that has made its own kind of rules within itself. And now other people are like, hey, these things are not okay, and they're keeping people out, or whatever the case. And then you have stuff like Gamergate that will happen, where it explodes around people getting offended, that their offenses are offensive, Like, no sense. It's really not. So people will be like, there's no harassment in Gamergate, and they're harassing someone while they tell them there's no harassment in gaming, and this kind of thing. So, yeah, but thankfully more and more people are standing up and saying, it's not okay, actually. How about that? Yeah, have all of the seats, really. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, the tax, I think manifests itself in a lot of different ways. And this kind of comes back to that question of open and free software, right? Because you would think if you were to start from scratch, like that if you had a choice between, using Windows and Microsoft Word and Mathematic, whatever, the whole pile of proprietary software, and using Linux and OpenOffice and Firefox, you would think that marginalized communities would prefer to go with the cheaper one, right? The one that is built by communities, where they could have like direct access power to affect the direction, the features of these tools, and that they could get them without cost. But what happens, of course, is that many people, especially people who have least control over their work environments, right, are expected to learn certain kinds of software, are expected to have a literacy with the proprietary tools.
Yes.
And then also learning the literacy, that kind of double work of learning other kinds of tools on top of it becomes even more burdensome because, each step is just harder and requires more time that is harder to get. But it just strikes me as such a tragedy.
Yeah, it really is. It's like it's an unfortunate situation, and I like that there was the comparison made between slow computing and slow food. So more and more people know about all the horrible things that happen in the food industry. I had to stop watching Netflix documentaries because I could not start my own farm on Mars because I can't buy the seeds because they're all owned by Monsanto. Thank you. Yes. It was so traumatic, like my brain couldn't even hold all the information. But anyway, so all of these documentaries that give people the information that things are terrible, and then there's like little option for what to actually do. So there is a lot that you would need to do if you wanted to like reduce your carbon footprint, or if you wanted to really take as much corruption out of your experience in terms of the products and services that you use. Everything is tainted. It's really unfortunate. But with slow computing, there are ways that you can remove yourself away from the main line, or I say main line because I'm all at a seminary, so that's how we think about things. But the mainstream proprietary software or hardware, and try and support other institutions the same way you would go to a credit union as opposed to Wells Fargo, which was based in slavery, or Chase, or all these other places that caused the financial crisis and then like got slaps on the wrist, and now they're thriving. Yay for them. Right? So yeah, the road to extracting yourself from this system that you've gotten quite comfortable in is painful, because change is painful, and then you have to learn new stuff. All the ease and the smoothness and the rounded edges of this corrupted system, when you leave it, it's a bit of a rough spot. And so people who try and extract, it's really hard, so they maybe go back even harder. It's kind of like being on a diet. But the people that are able to successfully wean themselves off of these systems, like, you are an inspiration, my friend. You, my friend, are doing good work in this. Like, you are a pioneer in showing people and doing the actual thing of weaning yourself off of these software and finding alternatives. And then in those alternatives, I appreciate your perspective on how it is a little bit, there's a learning curve. It's maybe not as quick. It's maybe not as easy as some of the other options. But the benefits of knowing that the work that you're doing is in a better space, and the way that it's being done is done in a way that is ethically better in a lot of cases. Like when you learn about why you're doing what you're doing, that intentionality, it makes a difference. The same way with food, the same way with where you bank, and now with where you compute, like, or how you compute. All of those things are connected.
well, it can't be done without chaplains, and that's when you get into this idea of slow computing or free and open software and so forth, it really requires a kind of inversion of the way we think about what it takes to run computer stuff. For instance, the economic model, the industrial model of current software development is basically everything gets built in Silicon Valley by like a few dudes in a garage, right?
Yeah.
And then it gets tweaked on in India, and then it gets delivered to everybody wherever, all totally uniform. And the neat thing, the possibilities that slow computing tools, that these open tools allow for, is because the software can always be adjusted and tweaked for local circumstances. It actually means that you kind of decentralize the whole process. You don't need somebody in one place doing everything. You instead have a model where you have tech service providers all over the place who are all simultaneously, on the one hand, feeding improvements into the commons, which is that kind of code base, the open code base, and then being paid in their local communities to adapt that code base to local needs, right? Whether it means using it through language or, if your local need is a school, creating a really kind of education-friendly presentation of the stuff, and the flexibility is just so powerful. You at the same time as you're contributing to a global commons, you're able to create something local. And that means that you need people, I love going to small towns and seeing like the little computer stores that are still, where they have these 1980s machines lying around, and they're always totally messy, but like those places should be booming. If we had a slow computing world, those places would be the centers of innovation, because they'd be making everything work for the people in those communities, and they'd be feeding the global commons.
Yes.
And then so also with tech chaplains, we'd need people to like help us through these challenges. We wouldn't just be going to the Genius Bar and talking to these people who have very, very specific monopolized questions and answers, whose job is not actually to fix anything or to help you through anything so much as just to take your machine and then replace a part of it at a very high cost.
Yes.
It's a different model. And another thing that's different about it is in some ways could be thought of as like a theological difference, a relationship to sin in the software, right? One of the things that's really different about using open software as opposed to closed kinds is that, when something goes wrong on an Apple system, say, and an error thing comes up and it says, press this to tell Apple about it.
Yeah.
It goes to Apple, and Apple buries that report as deep in its little databases as it possibly can, and it never sees the light of day except for the particular engineers whose job it is to deal with those sorts of things. Because if those stockholders knew how many of those reports were getting filed, they would start freaking out, and they'd be following them and watching them and reporting on them, and it would start playing with the stock price, and that's very, very tricky stuff. On the other hand, with open tools, like for instance, on the server organization that I'm a part of, May 1st PeopleLink, when I submit a bug report to them, like the other day, one of the tools I use regularly went down for a couple hours. I submitted a bug report. It's totally public. Anyone on the internet can read that report. That also means that anyone on the internet can step in and offer a solution if they can think of one, right? It means that the palette of options for solutions is much, much broader. Yeah. And the whole thing is really structured around recognizing, in a sense, recognizing the original sin of software development, which is that nothing is ever perfect, nothing. And you just expose that to the world. It's a kind of constant confessional. Like the early Christians used to do their confessions, in public to each other, not in a tiny private confessional to the priest. Whereas in some ways the closed model is much more that of like, it's just you and the priest, and it's very anonymous, and only the priest hears everything. And, the community doesn't, as a result, have the kind of comfort and have whatever one gains from knowing that you're not the only one struggling.
Yeah.
And the result of it for me, just emotionally, in processing these problems, which can really ruin your day, it was amazing to discover that when I started using these open tools, the glitches just didn't bother me that much. It felt like, okay, this is a thing that our community has to work on. Great. Let's get to it. Maybe the next version will fix this problem. Looking forward to that. I'm going to file a bug report and let the developers know. I don't really know how to fix it, but I do know how to file a bug report. It's not very hard.
Right.
And suddenly I'm empowered in that process.
Yes.
And people thank me for filing the bug report. I think actually there should be a lot more celebration of non-technical, non-developer participants in open source culture. The people who are talking about it, who are helping other people, think about it and get into it. People who are filing bug reports. People who are donating to the organizations, and recognizing that there are more roles in this culture than just the developer. Again, it's that kind of that question of recentering.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm thinking about like if you transfer your food over to organic food, it tastes a little different, it looks a little different. Yeah. It's still a banana. It has maybe a few more brown spots. It's okay. You'll be fine. But that bite tastes sweeter knowing that the people who grew it and the people who picked it and the people who put it in your grocery store are treated better, or they have better wages, or the food was grown with more love, or whatever the case may be. So as you're able to better participate in a system that is it's not crushing people down and like doesn't have profits as its sole purpose for existing, but instead allows people to empower themselves and be a part of the process, like that has a different connotation and a different tone to it. And part of what I've seen happen as I work with individuals is that they'll get excited about when they fix something, or they'll get excited for noticing that something was wrong. And I help breathe that into people as they see things, as they notice things, as they try something different. I try and instill in them a curiosity, let them know that it's okay. It's okay. It's all okay. You know what? It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. Yeah. And just like say that as many times as possible to them so that they know when I'm not there that it's okay, because we all need to hear that more anyway. But especially if we're dealing with technology, there's already this inherent fear. People get hives. Like when I try and talk to individuals in general about technology, people's eyes either glaze over or they have a traumatic experience playing in the back of their head. I can just see it in their eyes. So there's a lot of space for healing. And I think that by engaging in a community like an open source community where it's almost like getting your fingers in the dirt and getting back to the earth. It's like you're getting into the code and you're really close to the ground floor of what's happening with your technology, and that you are a part of that process in a way that's a lot different than if you're just moved through the process and you're really passive and you're receiving everything.
Yeah. And I think that your focus on the person is so important. And it reminds me of a moment when I was, one summer I was teaching classes, at a local community center, just on like computers 101, super basic stuff. And I had like come up with this whole curriculum and was ready to like, by the end of it, to have everybody like a power user and so forth. And suddenly I was in a classroom with people who like, for whom double clicking on a mouse was like
a new thing. Yep.
a foreign muscle movement that required practice. And it blew my mind that this was actually possible. And that I would say, okay, just control click here. And they would say, what did you say?
Right.
I was just astonished by that. And And
Yeah.
there was one man in particular who spoke very, very little English, was the worst in the class. And, and he was a, clearly a nice man, but I saw myself evaluating him, just as like a poor computer user, evaluating him in terms of the machine rather than as a person. And then one of those nights I went to an event, I forget what it was. And there was a speaker who said, we'd just like to introduce a special guest that we have. He's a famous South American architect. We're so honored to have him in our community. And the same man got up, And it just, that moment, it just struck me how, in the context of that, I had just been totally seeing him not as a person, but as like a bad computer user. And had failed to recognize the person there. When he got up on that, in that evening, it was an entirely different, it was as if seeing an entirely different person.
Yes. Truth. Absolutely. And this is why it's so easy in cultures like the tech cultures or gaming cultures to completely judge people on their acumen, like on their prowess, on their ability to function and maneuver and master the machine, which I feel like is not necessarily the case. Like, so shifting around what we understand to be excelling at technology or owning at technology, like instead of mastering the machine, how about helping other people feel comfortable using the machine, like, or being able to just be curious and continue forward, like perspicacity as something that's really amazing and admirable in people, like just making it different, shifting the perspective from the individual's ability to conquer the machine and like the divide and conquer, like that really problematic text in Genesis in the second creation story that is often used in a way to detriment both the earth and the subaltern or people who are marginalized. Like you're told by God to go out and conquer the world and divide and all of these things, and people take that quite seriously. So instead, when you have people looking to build each other up, and that's what the focus is, and that's what's celebrated, and that's what's the aspiration, then that kind of drive and humility it makes for a different experience for everyone involved. Yeah, so there's this programming culture that I've recently heard about where essentially all of the frat guys that used to go into marketing and finance realized that the money was in technology, so they started taking coding classes. And then now they're working in the startups, and they bring that vibe with them. And not just frat guys, because there's other people too, but that kind of stereotypical image of a person who's sexist, who's misogynistic, who's really basic, like really uncomfortable, just bristling personalities, but they take those into an already hegemonic experience, which is the tech culture. It's already white and Asian men, and so then if you're a woman, or if you're a person of color, or if you're a LGBTQIA person in some of these spaces, it's not very friendly. So you get pushed out again, and it's really difficult to find footing. It's finding fertile ground or finding somewhere where you can be your full self and be comfortable and learn openly and it be okay. Like it's like it's trying to search for Eden or something.
Yeah. Well, that's certainly, for instance, what I've seen in places like Double Union, this hackerspace I mentioned earlier. Where you see that this is like a geek culture. Like when I walked in the first time, it was like they were making a robot, like you would find at any other hackerspace. But the robot, like, had some like crazy, I forget what they were, like pipe cleaners and like hair attached to it. I mean, it was like a little bit of a doll, a little bit of a robot.
Yeah.
And it was super geeky and it was running on open source software and all this stuff. But creating those safe spaces, I think seems really important for the communities to find their own language and their own self-understanding, and then to be able to assert them. And one of the things that was really neat to hear there. Not that money is the measure of much of anything, but that these women were saying that since they'd been participating in this community, they'd seen their incomes go up because having more kind of group solidarity, they were able to be more assertive in their workplaces, and often that's what's required in order to get the same kind of the same kind of remuneration that others are getting.
Right. Right.
So what kinds of things have you seen really work for helping people feel safe working with technology and feel empowered?
Well, one of the first things, especially since people come to me in crisis, so they're really focused on the problem, is I try to get them to focus on calming down and starting from a perspective of woosah. Let's breathe. Let's take a moment. Especially if they're frenetic and they're up here. Because if you're upset or anxious or afraid, you get this whiteout. White, you can't see anything on the screen. No matter what I tell you, it's just not going to stick because your emotions are so all over the place that you're not going to be in a space to receive anything. And especially since part of this process where I teach and train and people and I get them to learn stuff, and you're not going to learn anything if you are about to throw your computer out of a window. It's not going to happen. So I actually focus on getting people to calm down and breathe, and I get them just detached a little bit from their device, just for a second even. And I look at them, I have them look at me, and I do it on the sly, really, because I'm just asking, well, tell me what's going on, tell me what's happening. And then as they calm down a little bit, then I have them work with their computer. The second thing I do, I don't touch anybody else's device. I'm not going to be there at 3 o'clock in the morning when it breaks again, if it breaks again. So I'm not going to be sitting there and typing on your computer or moving around stuff on your phone. It's not mine. So I encourage people to touch it, to use it, to click, to this, that, and the other. And that helps them build a better relationship with it. Like when babies need human touch, I think the statistic is humans need 5 meaningful touches a day to feel whole. And it's 20 seconds of a hug or a hold hand or something. I learned that as a certified nursing assistant randomly. But with your device, when you use a 10-foot pole just to send email because you're so anxious about breaking it or you really don't know how to use it, then your relationship with that device is always going to be sort of in tension. So I bring people down and help them build a better rapport, if you will, with their device. And then there's also encouraging people to customize their space. And this is where this open source thing gets really amazing because people can customize their space in so many different ways. Instead of just skins or changing your desktop image, you can have all kinds of things at your fingertips, literally customized to exactly what you need and what you want, and none of what you don't, using open source. So before you can get people to the open source conversation, there's still the conversation, this general bird's eye view of what they feel about technology, what their experience is. And since I believe the technology, like the robot revolution, will happen one day, they'll become sentient, ask for rights, I will be fighting on their side. I already know. Okay, the word robot comes from the Czech for slave, and I already know that they're the new magical Negro. Have you seen Big Hero 6? It's a monolithic character. They the magical Negro. Robot is the new magical Negro. I need to write that up. But anyway, there's this connection between the machines and the marginalized. It's really, you got to see that. So anyway, the people that I work with, by the time I finish that first session, what I really want to invoke in them is a sense of curiosity, a sense that they can fix something and it's going to be okay, that they can't blow up their machine, and to give them some really general, some touch points. Like if you see a gear, that's usually settings, or if you see a red X, that usually means close. Like when you talked about the double click being serious, there's an entirely new language of touch with our machines that people are missing out on because if you didn't follow along each generation to learn what these new swipes and gestures were, and you went from black and white TV to now you have an iPad, are you kidding me? There's one button on that sucker, maybe 2. And then everything else is swiping and touching in different ways and different kinds of pressure or touching 1 or 2 or 3 times with 1 or 2 or 3 hands or fingers. It's a lot. It's a lot to learn and it's a lot to take in. So encouraging people to be there with their device, play with it, actually play with it, go mess around with it, touch stuff, change things, see what happens. I will literally be with someone and say, okay, go ahead and click such and so, this one right here. Yeah, go ahead, click it. It'll be okay. They're asking for permission to do something because they don't even feel comfortable to maneuver through that space. So,
What do you think about the question of etiquette? You know, it seems to me like these technologies are changing more quickly than we know how to and we know how to change our know how to behave around them. You know, when do you turn your phone off? When is it okay to look at your texts or pick up a call? You know, and you know, how do we begin to think about that? Do we need to? Will we just figure it out? I don't know.
Well, it's a huge question.
Especially on social media, and when there are tools, you know, that are surveilling us and that are taking our data and could be used against us in ways we don't understand, like credit scores. You know, our ability to buy a house, to get a job in the future. You know.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself guiding people in those ways?
I do. So it's a big conversation that lots of people are having now, especially faith leaders, this notion of digital etiquette. And I've been learning from this notion of digital citizenry, which has 9 different elements to it, including rights and responsibility, digital law. But digital etiquette is one of the things that I focus most on with digital citizenry. And the norms and standards and expectations that exist within the digital space are completely different across the board, from moment to moment, from place to place, and they are crafted very differently in different ways. So, because everything that we've learned about interacting with other people in the physical space, I was going to say meat space, but if you're vegan or vegetarian, you might not want to be called meat. So, in the physical space, where we're still trying to figure out how do we treat other people well and how do we want to be treated, that doesn't translate one-to-one. Like, it doesn't just digitize when you go online, because of things like anonymity and because of avatars, and like we have private, public, and professional selves, and each of those selves, which are fragmented aspects of who we are, that exist in the digital space. Like, there's different ways, like just how you talk differently to your mom than you would your boss, you talk differently on Facebook than you might on Twitter, or like these kinds of things. And so people of faith are trying to figure out, how do we create an authentic community, and how do we authentically communicate in the digital space, because we're in the business of transcendence, right? And we are in the business of aligning ourselves with the divine and in community with others, communing with the spirit. Like, how do we do that in the digital space? Because everybody's there. Like, people are interacting in the digital space. So, like, there's a church in Second Life, and there's apps for prayers, and there's a Yoruba app for Yoruba priests to use. And, like, there's all kinds of ways that people are putting spiritual practices into the digital space, and then also trying to figure out how to build communities and worshiping spaces in the digital space as well. But I think what's important is this notion of being diverse and having more people at the table to be able to call you out and hold you accountable on what you're doing. Because if you're just one type of group of people and you don't have other, it's basically siloed, right? So if you're siloed and you're only surrounded by people who agree with you and who all look like you and talk like you and come from the same perspective that you do, then you might be missing out on something. And I recognize that as a liberal, progressive, Christian-centered, black woman, like all the different identities that I have, I'm still missing on things. I'm racist in my own ways. I'm sexist in my own ways. And all of these other ists and isms that everybody has, they just manifest differently and they're in different degrees. Like, all of those things can get transferred in the digital space. There's no Emily Post, right? There's no, like, Jesus didn't say what to do in a forum, okay? So we have to figure out how to take the ethics that we've built from our religious, our faith, our philosophical experiences, and all of those ethics and values, and what do they look like in the digital space. And I think that part of the answer is talking about the fact that we need to figure it out, having conversations with different kinds of people, both people who are new to the process and who are afraid of it, and who are like, well, only real conversations happen in person. Really? Because when you called your mama this weekend, I bet you felt really loved when she said, I love you, on the phone. So, right, like, we're having a conversation right now, and this experience is real because it's happening. So there's a lot that those people who are afraid and who have hesitation, like, they have a lot to add to the conversation, just as much as someone who their main conversations and the main way that they live life is digitally. Like, the people that commit themselves to Second Life, for example. And now with things like the Oculus Rift, which has come out, which is like the 360 virtual reality, there's going to be more and more people who are going to opt out of physical life and who are going to want to live in a virtual space all the time. It's going to be like the holodeck, right? And so we need to figure out, what is it going to mean if you kill someone on the holodeck? Like, are we going to go to trial? Like, is that going to be a thing? We need to let's talk about it.
Yeah, well, I think that point of kind of looking back to our traditions, to like what our mamas taught us, you know, if our mamas taught us stuff, you know, is so important, because so much of like digital culture is hitting us with this idea that everything is new and everything is different now, right? Because it's online.
Nothing new under the sun.
You know, a little hobby of mine lately has been to like just play with the definitions of words that are being used in the digital space. Democratization, for instance, like the way it's used in digital culture is like completely different from how it's used in like political science or you know, philosophy. Decentralization, very different again. Usually what is removed is the sense of accountability. And, you know, we get democracy of access, you know, this app is democratizing this thing, you know, suddenly now everybody can order an Uber, not just, you know, a black car through Uber, not just the people who, you know, have accounts with these fancy companies. But what we don't get is the kind of that old fashioned control, that old fashioned, you know, sense of governance and ownership. That used to come with it. And I think that is so right, that sometimes the hardest thing to do in digital circumstances is just remember how you learned to behave when you weren't online, you know. And some of us, you know, are online all the time, and people are, you know, kids are getting are learning their morals online. You know, this it isn't a matter of transition, you know, it's a matter of encounter. And this is a very, very moral space, you know, and so these conversations about things like Gamergate are, you know, of huge importance.
I completely agree. There's also...
go ahead.
I was going to say there's also conversations about technological devices, and similar to food, how they started and where they end up. Like, people get the creamy middle of products, right? But we don't really know, like, the materials that came out of this cell phone. How many countries were mined for the materials that went into it? How many people were put to labor at maquiladoras in Mexico and, you know, were mistreated and whatnot in order to put this together? And then when I'm done with it, when I recycle it, whether I recycle it at the company or whether I recycle it at an e-recycle waste, whatnot, what happens to it? Does it end up in an e-dump in China or Ghana? Like, all of the, like, this aspect of the ethics of what we use is also important. Like, talking about going to open source, really being intentional about what we buy and how we use it. Like, I am steeped in the closed source, and I have very little open source in my life. And so your article about the joy of slow computing is like the first step to really figuring out, okay, well, actually, what does it look like? I feel like I'm going to convert to a new religion. I need like a scripture to lead the way.
There's a bit of that, and the hardware story is one I didn't even want to get into, because it's that's where, you know, open source is really is you know, even more behind. There is some really great stuff out there, Raspberry Pis and Arduino. You know, another thing is you know, is the idea of recycleware. You know, the idea of just using old machines, you know, and not throwing them away after 3 years. You know, one of my great tech chaplains is an uncle of mine who is a great computer programmer, and but he just uses stuff from the 80s, you know, and the 90s, and he gets what he needs to get done. You know, he's got this pile of old computers, and he kind of pieces them together into ones that still work, and the result is he's not buying any new hardware.
Nice.
And he can, you know, we interact all the time online and so forth. He can still participate, and there's, you know, along with that kind of obsession with the new in tech culture is this you know, impulse that you always need to have the latest stuff. And it's forgotten that, you know, you can take an old Apple II, or not, maybe not quite an Apple II, one of those old first fishbowl Macintoshes, and you can run a web server off of that thing. You know, I mean, you can. These tools still have use, and you know, I think it's actually a kind of spiritual
Yes.
to honor these machines enough and the work that went
Yes.
into them,
Mm-hmm.
to find uses for them for years to come, rather than treating them as disposable. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe if we did more of that, it would mean less of the kind of extraction that really is fueling this
Right.
stuff. I mean,
To
we should
feed
be
the
asking
need.
the question of whether all these, whether these iPhones justify themselves, whether all these tools, these
Yeah.
gizmos, the stuff that we're all using all the time,
Mm-hmm.
they come at a high cost in terms of mining conditions and assembly conditions.
Right. Right.
Um,
Well, the HoloLens, I'm sure you've heard of it from Microsoft, is threatening, well, maybe not threatening, but it's poised to replace a lot of the devices that we have around. Like, it can be a TV, it can be a this, that, and the other. So there's some interesting turns that I'm hoping will happen, because I feel like for the fringe folks who will jump on the slow computing wagon and ride that home, like, there will still be a large chunk of humanity that won't. However, the idea will hopefully be to trickle down some of the philosophies and the ethics that come out of the movement, so that more people maybe think twice about which device to buy. Or, like, I don't know if it even exists yet, but if there's a way to mark different businesses by their labor practices and show this is the number of countries that were used, or mine, like, this is where this came from, like, to be able to take a device and show what countries were mined for what and where it was built, and, like, all that information before you buy it. Like, if that doesn't exist, I want to do that. Like, project done, wrap. Okay, I'm there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, maybe it's time for us to wrap up, but this has been a lot of fun, and
Yeah.
and we should do it again sometime.
Absolutely.
I think these conversations are so important, and I'm so grateful for what you do to make them possible.
Thank you. And I'm thankful to you for exposing me to it and continuing to write about it. Thank you.
Well, absolutely. Take care, Shamika. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.